Okay, so hi everybody. So for the last part of today's session, as Shelley mentioned, myself and a couple of my colleagues from the library will be talking to you. And we're going to focus on aspects of quality to do with the journals that you might choose to publish in, the teaching and learning journals that you might choose to publish in. So I guess we're talking about when you're going to put your work somewhere, choosing the place that's going to basically make the biggest or have the biggest effect on the research community, but also for yourself as a researcher. So choosing quality journals, we'll also touch on places like putting your work in open access repositories, things like that, and the impact that that can have too. So we'll be talking about things at a fairly high level, lots of things about the quality of journals and giving you some tools as well that you can use to look at the quality of journals. This little brochure is on your table there, so that's got links to the tools that we'll be mentioning. So if you don't get everything from this PowerPoint, take this away. Also, my main takeaway for you from, I guess, what we're going to say is that the library is here to support you with the things that we're talking about. So basically, if something here interests you and you want to follow it up later on, just get in touch with us. So that's a good time for me to introduce myself. My name's David Honeyman. I'm the HSM faculty librarian here at Bond. And my colleagues who'll be presenting after me, Tiffany Mitchell is the business faculty librarian, and Antoinette Cass is the manager of scholarly publications and copyright here at Bond. Okay, so let's look at some aspects of the quality of journals that you might choose to publish in. The first thing you might do is try and identify a few potential journals, particularly if you're looking at publishing in teaching and learning. So in your own field, you might be well aware of the prominent journals or the relevant journals. In teaching and learning, maybe less so. You might be less aware of, what are considered the important journals. One thing that you can do is look at where papers similar to your paper have been published. So they could be good places to publish your own work. But there are also some tools you can use for this kind of thing. So looking at teaching and learning journals, but even in your own field, if you want to get an idea, what are the prominent journals, or, what's the reputation of journals. So the tools that you can use. Number one is Google Scholar Metrics. So I've just gone to Google Scholar Metrics. You can just Google that and get there, or the URL is on your handout. And I've grabbed a screenshot of what they consider to be the top publications in education. So teaching and learning journals there. So they're ranked. Google has a system of ranking them. And according to them, the number one journal in teaching and learning is Teaching and Teacher Education. There are other tools that you can use to do the same thing, listed down the bottom there, and you'll get different results from each of them. So if you don't know, what are the prominent journals, you can have a look at these tools, and that will just give you an idea of maybe some journals that you might consider. So moving on from that, if you have a few journals in mind, shortlisted possibly, and you're trying to make that decision, which is the journal I'm going to publish in, or, which one am I going to submit to first, some things that you might consider when you're comparing journals side by side. Is it peer-reviewed? That's a fairly obvious one, but I guess if the journal is peer-reviewed, that brings a certain level of quality to the journal. Journals, if they are peer-reviewed, will very often list that on their website, so you can just find it. There is a tool you can use to quickly get an answer, which is called Ulrich's Web, so there's a link on your handout. So if you do just quickly want to look up and say, is this journal peer-reviewed, is this journal peer-reviewed, is this journal peer-reviewed, you can use that tool. Impact factor. So another thing you might do when you've got journals side by side is look at their impact factor. So the impact factor, I'm sure you've all heard of it, but very, very briefly, it's basically a number given to journals by the company Thomson Reuters. It's essentially a score that they give journals, and it's a way that you can kind of say, does this one score better than the other one? It's based on the citations that the articles in that journal have received, with the general idea being, this journal has received more citations, so therefore it's having more impact in the field. So the impact factor, the official impact factor, as I mentioned, is produced by Thomson Reuters, and the tool that you use to find it is called Journal Citation Reports. We have that here at Bond, so you can access that. So if you do want to go and look up your journals, you can find their impact factor if they're listed. So again, I grabbed a screenshot of the top journals by impact factor according to Journal Citation Reports. The Teaching and Learning Journal with the highest impact factor is Reviews in Educational Research, there with an impact factor of 3.897. Interestingly, the #1 journal according to Google Scholar Metrics is not even on that list, so you'll get different results from the different things. And all of these kind of numbers are really just an indication. There are other tools you can use as well, so down the bottom I've listed a few, and you've got the URLs for all of those on your handout. So if your journal or one of your journals is not on one of them, it might be on another one, it might be ranked differently, so you can try a few of them. And just a couple of caveats when you're using numbers like this or scores for journals. #1, you can't compare across disciplines, or you can't compare different disciplines just because the citation patterns are different in different disciplines. So you can't take a psychology journal and compare it to an education journal. But if you are comparing two journals from the same discipline, it can be an indication. You might think, well, this one scores really highly and this one's not even on the list, so maybe this one does have more impact. Caveat #2 is that these kinds of numbers are just one thing that you might consider. Obviously, the most important place or the most important consideration when you're considering where to publish is, will the right people be reading my paper when it's published? So, the right outlet for your work might be one which has a low impact factor or doesn't have an impact factor. So these are basically just numbers that you can consider. Something else that you can consider when you're looking at journals is, where is it indexed? Which basically just means which databases have articles from that journal in the database. Another way to phrase that is, if somebody working in your field searches the major databases, will they be able to find your article down the track? That tool, Ulrich's Web, which I've mentioned already, can tell you where journals are indexed. But again, the library can help you with this, so you can just basically send your journals through and we'll have a look for you. And finally, for me, something you might think about is the HERDEC and ERA research evaluations, which happen, I think it's every year for HERDEC and every few years for ERA. Only a couple of points on those. For your paper to count for either of those evaluation exercises, it needs to be in a peer-reviewed outlet. So you might choose a peer-reviewed journal over a non-peer-reviewed one. And for HERDEC, for your paper to count for HERDEC, it essentially has to have a Bond affiliation on it. So if you do have multiple affiliations, you might consider putting both of your affiliations on there. Okay, so there's some things when you're looking at journals that you know are of good quality and try and pick which one you might publish in. At the other end of the scale, you're probably all aware that these days there are predatory publishers who publish journals which you shouldn't be publishing in. So I'll hand over to Tiffany Mitchell to tell you about predatory publishers.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. As David had said, my name is Tiffany Mitchell, the Business Faculty Librarian. Is there anyone from business here at all today? Excellent. Hi. So I'm going to do the scary part with the predatory publishers. So we want to know, you might have your own stories within your own academic circle, or you've seen programs on the examples on predatory publishers, but I mean, how did they evolve, this group of publishers? I mean, if you can go back to Elsevier, Wiley, Talon Francis, they enjoy very high margins within their business. So a very attractive idea for an entrepreneur, okay, to get into this multi-million-dollar scholarly publishing game, okay? So they don't have to pay for review, they don't have to pay their content creators, they're not affected by external market pressures, or consumption is not affected by the price as well. Okay, so clues on spotting those kinds of publishers. They might have a broad list of topics in one journal. Obviously, construction, psychology, environmental science, that kind of thing. I know even within the business journals, there are, like, for example, the Journal of Economics, Behaviour and Organisation. Even though that seems quite broad, it's still to do with, finance, management, economics, okay? The content is poor, the grammar poor, incorrect author names. You might have seen with emails in your inbox over-the-top introductory letters as well. Okay, and they do spruik lesser-known citation impact factor technology. So David was talking about Scopus Web of Science. So, for example, Scopus provides the largest citation database of peer-reviewed literature, okay? So that's a definite go-to, to look at technologies like that. Again, publishing costs are moved to the author's side, so that in turn creates a very negative kind of peer review process, often with short deadlines, okay? So strategy is to avoid these kind of publishers. Is it a journal you would read? I mean, Shelley mentioned in her presentation, is your paper to the intended journal, okay? Which is a really good point. Choose a journal read by your audience you are targeting. Aim for a high quality peer reviewed journal. Is your supervisor, I'm sure, are there any students here? I think yeah. I mean, you would probably know that. So ask your colleagues, are they familiar with that particular journal? Again, is it indexed by Scopus or Web of Science? Okay, so quality technologies. This is a really good point. Is the publisher or journal on the Beale's predatory publishers list? This is something as librarians that we go to when we get academics asking us about a particular publisher. We'll go to this particular website, which is run by Professor Jeffrey Beale from the University of Colorado, Denver. And he constantly updates. I mean, the last time I saw this, he had updated the 28th of September, so it's constantly updated with potential, possible, dubious publishers, okay?
How many are on that list?
It's a lot, unfortunately. Go and have a look. Yeah, it's a good question, yeah. Go and have a look. But again, please refer to the Bond Library Journal Collection as a source of, good quality curated, journals. Okay, and again, as David mentioned, ask your faculty librarian for publishing-related support. We're only too happy to help. We have a huge knowledge base, across all the faculties, even law as well. We've got lots of good examples of predatory publishers that have been submitted to academics that we can help you with. This is an example. Look how recent it is, 8th of May 2015. So it's not a Bond character, Dr. O, but it's actually an academic here at Bond, assistant professor. And he was sent this particular email. Okay, you can have a quick look at that, have a quick read of it. This was sent to one of our faculty librarians, and the professor asked whether, what they would advise him doing. So what we've done, I've just created a little nitpicky part to this email. I hope you're doing well. The gushy grammar, the Journal of Defence Management, okay, that particular journal was researched. That journal is not indexed anywhere, and as you can see behind the next sentence, they would like that manuscript by May 17, so only a week to go and get it organised. The particular publisher, which was OMIC, which is actually quite probably famous in the press at the moment. I know that Radio National gave or presented a program on predatory publishers, and they did mention this particular group. And that's, again, another good source of information, that particular program that they presented. And again, the grammar, it is not feasible for you, then please let me know your feasible time. And the lovely signature at the end, a little over the top, I think. And there's this one more. Again, the one up the top here, the KEI, that is not on the Beals predator publishing list. So that was probably our first go-to to see if it was on that list. Again, an unprofessional introduction with that email targeting that particular author. So they actually have researched that particular academic and their papers. And this particular librarian said, I'd be looking for better journals to publish in. Doing some research with looking at the particular articles in that journal, and they had very little or no content. So again, please feel very free to come and see the faculty librarian or Antoinette Cass, our Manager of Scholarly Publications.
Okay, so I'm talking about open access, and I've got a definition up there. I've got another quick definition, because open access is all about the internet. I've also got a couple of points that qualifying what is free, what is not free. But what I wanted to say was open access shifts the costs of publishing so that the reader can obtain the content at no cost. So open access tells you about the method of dissemination of the publication or the data set or the image, whether you can reuse the information, and whether the article is archived. What open access doesn't tell you about is the scope of the journal, the quality of the journal or the article, the review process of the journal, or the language. So you've heard a little bit, and we've shown you a little bit about the dark side of open access with predatory publishing, and this graphic shows you the benefits. Open access benefits researchers, institutions, nations, and society as a whole. For researchers, it brings increased visibility, usage, and impact for your work. And institutions enjoy the same benefits. There is growing evidence to show that countries also benefit from open access, as it increases the impact of the research on which they spend their public money. Open access is about reaching beyond academia to policymakers and practitioners, people like nurses, teachers, economists, and importantly, researchers in less developed and disadvantaged areas of the world. Open access is the alternative to closed access or subscription access, as provided by the library through the subscription databases. And so now in the internet age, it is possible for research findings to be available free of charge to anyone who wishes to find them. So one of the ways that we do that, we've talked about that this morning a little bit, is e-publications at Bond. So this is the homepage of the Bond University's open access green model repository, which is an archive as well of Bond academic works. By that we mean they're going to be kept in an archive. The platform might change, but we're going to keep them for as long as we can. So you'll notice in the left-hand bottom corner there's a discipline wheel, and this shows the areas of strength represented in our repository. The magenta area, between the purple and the blue, represents educational outputs of the university. So it's well represented at the moment. So when you submit a work for a publication, you can also deposit a version of your publication with EPUBs. And this is usually the version before peer review that most publishers would allow you to put up in a public domain like our repository. So the team that works with me, the Scholarly Publications team, we check the publisher's copyright, and we either upload that paper or we put a citation up. At least we've got a citation up there so people know about your work, and we'll put a link to the journal. And as soon as we overcome embargoes or deadlines, we can make that paper available to the rest of the world. So repositories provide usage data as well as like the number of times your article's downloaded, and this may translate into citations over time and can be used in support of your impact, your publication impact. with your PDRs. Okay, so this is an example of one of Shelley's works, as it happens, from the Learning and Teaching series in e-publications at Bond. And I'd just like to point out a few features of, this is a short record, but it obviously has a citation. We do an APA-style citation under the publication details. We have a copyright statement. We have the number of download counts up here underneath the download button. So it tells you how many downloads since the item was uploaded. There's social media share buttons there as well. And there's a hyperlinked discipline there, which is the Higher Education Teaching Commons. Now, this is just an example. If we put a paper into that commons, that is now in another sort of virtual repository with all the other higher education teaching common articles, 2,000 of them there at the moment across all the commons, mostly USA, but around the globe who use this platform. So as Shelley kindly mentioned, not only are personal researchers highly indexed, but the repository itself is highly indexed. So I just did a search on e-publications. We came up at the top. So there's the URL. It's also in the little pamphlet we sent out. Just a quick word about Creative Commons licences. They're becoming the predominant form of open access licensing. They protect the author's rights and at the same time make the work openly available to share. There are 6 licences that clearly state the extent of the use of the material, and they have become an accepted way to grant copyright permissions for use of creative and academic work. The most basic is the one on the left, CC BY, which is meaning that the author must be attributed if you use this work. The other ones include, it must be non-commercial, it must be share alike. You can use it again, but you mustn't change it. And there's all these different variations, and they're becoming more and more used, and we use them in the repository as well. Okay, evaluating open access journals. Here's a typical publishing process for a journal article, showing the steps from submitted to accepted to the published version. Evaluating open access journals is much the same as evaluating any academic journal, with a few extra steps to consider within and outside of the publishing process. There are some important points to consider, and I've got a copy of these points to hand out to you as well. But some of the things that you should really consider is the publisher, and we've discussed this a little bit already. Did the publisher solicit your article or chapter via email? So this is not, it didn't used to be a common practice, but and it's not used by reputable or respected publishers. So direct email solicitations should be rejected generally. Have they been identified as a predatory publisher? Well, we've got the tools to help you find out that. If you haven't got time to look yourself, just ask your faculty librarian to have a look for you. What is their profit model? There are some that are out just for the profit. There are some that are run by non-profit organisations. So, look at their sort of intention. The journal itself, are they members of the Directory of Open Access Journals? Because that is a good thing. What peer review standards are used? Do they tell you anything about the peer review process? A lot of these predatory journals won't tell you very much. Is the submission process really fast? We've talked about it being 2 weeks, and that's not uncommon. Sometimes I've read that your submission might go up without any editorial processing at all, and then it's very hard to get that back, and that doesn't reflect very well at all. Is the journal indexed? We've talked about whether it's in Ulrichs or not. That's a good starting point. Is there any journal metrics? This takes time, of course. The new journals are at disadvantage, but it's something to consider. So it's history. What is the quality of the journal articles? Read a few yourself from that journal. Are you happy with the quality? If you are, maybe you can go ahead with them. And another point is, what university was the research affiliated with? Are they universities that have a good reputation? So I've got that to give out to you when we're finished.
Yes, we're going to have to.
Oh, okay. I was just going to mention, Directory of Open Access Journals, have a look at that. They've got their own reputation badge there. They recommend it. And we have a guide on the library website that talks about everything I've mentioned and more, all the different models and everything. But any questions, we can answer them for you. We really encourage that. So we thank you very much for your time today. And we've got all the faculty librarians represented there as well, in case you're not familiar with them. Thank you.